87% of all video games are considered critically endangered, according to a recent study. This means that you cannot play most classic games legally unless you have the original game and console, or if you want to travel several hours cross-country to visit a gaming library. Why? Why is it that books, music, movies are all generally easy to access, but a $200 billion per year industry can't pony up the money to preserve these classic titles on modern hardware? Now, I understand that video games are as much a business as they are an art form, and while all history should ideally be preserved, there are certain subpar games that just make no business sense to protect. In some cases, they are also games that many of us would prefer to forget in the moment. However, it is undeniable that the gaming industry's war against preservation is so pervasive that it causes some of the greatest games to get lost in the crossfire. In the interest of trying to preserve great works of art, as well as maintaining the integrity of gaming as an art form, I wanted to put together a top 10 list of the greatest games that are the hardest to play legally. This list is strictly made up of games that you either require the original hardware and software for, or a PC that can emulate those games. On top of that, acquiring this hardware often costs hundreds if not thousands of dollars, and even if you get it, there are certain barriers that will prevent you from fully enjoying the experience. Things like missing DLC, a lack of English localization, etc. Before I get started, I will quickly raffle off a few honorable mentions. There are several entries from the Fire Emblem series, although thankfully Switch 2 emulation is going to at least partially address that. There are various games from the Shin Megami Tensei series. For the love of God, port Strange Journey, please! There's Lionhead Studios' Black and White, Red Steel 2, and finally Quintet's Illusion of Gaia. Now, without further ado, this is my list of the top 10 greatest video games that you can't play. Number 10. PT Silent Hills, PlayStation 4. Okay, first things first. Yes, I know it's not technically a game. It's a playable teaser for a cancelled game. But look, when all the major gaming outlets and the gaming public at large deem this 1-hour experience as better than some of the greatest horror games ever made, we can overlook this technicality. The DNA for this game can be traced to so many modern horror titles, games like Resident Evil 7 and 8, Visage, and virtually all the games made by Bloober Team. Though those games are enjoyed by many, none of them come close to the imaginative wizardry of PT. The teaser is king of making the most out of so little. Though all you do is go through a continuously looping hallway while the environment around you takes on progressively sinister qualities, it's how the teaser makes even the most mundane things seem horrifying that keeps the memory of PT alive in our abused gamer hearts 10 years later. I say abused not just because we were robbed of the game it was teasing, but because the only legal way to play this transcendent work of horror media is if you have a PlayStation 4 that downloaded it back in 2014. If you don't, get ready to fork over hundreds if not thousands of dollars for a PS4 on eBay. Yeah, I'm arguably one of the biggest Silent Hill fans on the planet, and even I'm not coughing up that kind of dough. Luckily I don't have to because my amazing wife has the PT demo on her PS4, and I promise that's not the reason I married her. Well, not the only reason. Number 9. Xenosaga I and II, Nintendo DS. It's hard enough trying to play the original Xenosaga games. Though they're not available on any modern storefront, you can play them if you have original copies of the games and a PlayStation 2 or 3. This is a travesty because, in my opinion, the original Xenosaga series is probably the most underappreciated game series in the medium, next to the Talos Principle series in my opinion. Few games, let alone any work of art in any medium, have the scope and cerebral depth of Xenosaga, being matched only by its quasi-spiritual predecessor, Xenogears. Now, if you could have told me back in 2006 that I could play the first 2 games on the go on my Nintendo DS, that would be all I ever played on that thing aside from maybe Pokemon. Luckily, a DS port of these games did make it to that system alongside added story content, some fixes to the story in the second game that fans took issue with, alongside a variety of minigames that utilized the DS's touchscreen. The only problem is that this version of the game was only released in Japan. Thankfully, from what I understand, you can play this game on any DS, regardless of which region you're in. But to do so, you will have to pony up roughly $100, and of course, you have to speak Japanese because there's no complete English translation, be it official or from the fans. Though it's not all bad because I can still play the original Xenosaga, it's still disappointing that I will never be able to properly enjoy what is, apparently, one of the few solid portable console ports. I guess I'll just go back and play Max Payne for the Game Boy Advance for the 30th time. Number 8. Lost Kingdoms 1 and 2. GameCube. This one is a bit tricky, because as we know, the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to feature a bunch of old GameCube games that were once stuck on that console. Games like Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, F-Zero GX, and several others. However, it's not clear if the plan is to have all the original games on there at some point, or just the ones that are fan favorites or are likely to turn a profit. With that in mind, I tried to pick a couple of great games from that system that I think might not end up on Switch 2, and the first is this old series by From Software. Yeah, that From Software. The same company behind Dark Souls and Elden Ring made Lost Kingdoms. And while it's not on the same level of quality, both games are still really good. To summarize the gameplay of Lost Kingdoms, you remember the card battles from the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, where the holograms would show up and kick the crap out of each other? Except imagine instead of holograms, it's actual monsters and there's no card game rules. You just summon the monsters and they duke it out. That's what Lost Kingdoms is, and it's a blast, even in 2024 when I first played it. Beyond that though, the games feature some of the same design philosophy that we have come to love from the developers' modern titles, like minimalist storytelling, and of course chests that are placed in the most trollish places. Though there are plenty of underrated games in From Software's back catalog, this is probably the most underrated and probably the most difficult to get. Thankfully, of all the games on this list, the Lost Kingdoms series is probably one of the easier ones to obtain, provided you have a functioning GameCube system. Still, the chances of it appearing in modern storefronts are slim. Number 7. Killzone 2 and 3, PlayStation 3. Do you guys remember the good old days when my beloved Halo was the biggest first-person shooter franchise? For consoles at least? Well, the Killzone franchise was Sony's response to Halo back in the day. And while the first game failed to make any sort of impact, Killzone 2 and 3 were of such high quality that they made the PlayStation 3 competitive with the Xbox 360's first-person shooters at the time. No, it wasn't as popular as Halo, or Modern Warfare, or Gears, but it was successful enough that it was arguably Sony's most popular IP other than Uncharted for a short period of time. Unfortunately, the Killzone games that released after 2 and 3 were not well received or as successful as their predecessors, and when the developers went on to develop the immensely successful Horizon franchise, it was ensured that the Killzone franchise was effectively dead. So dead that nobody has bothered to make any sort of port for either Killzone 2 or 3, or maintained an official multiplayer server to keep its once thriving online community alive. The only way you can play these games is if you have a PlayStation 3 or an emulator. And even then, you're likely to only get half of the classic Killzone experience because the official multiplayer services are down. Granted, while you can join private servers to relive the online multiplayer, the amount of finagling you have to go through to set up the server, find a match, and not throw your controller at the wall when the only people you are fighting are the best Killzone players in the world is just not worth it for the average person. I could see a future where Killzone is brought back when a new PlayStation console needs a new killer app to launch with, but until Horizon stops selling tens of millions of copies, I don't see that happening for a while. Maybe PS7 or 8. Number 6. Metal Gear Solid 4, PlayStation 3. Before you even start, yes, I'm fully aware that I'm probably dating this list by putting this game on here, when the imminent Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2 will probably bring MGS4 to modern storefronts. But I don't care. It's ridiculous that it even took 2 decades for it to happen. Anyway, when that announcement is made, just replace this game with Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey, alright? Now with that out of the way, Metal Gear Solid 4 is probably my least favorite of the mainline Metal Gear games, but as the biggest Metal Gear fan on the planet, I still love it to pieces. After all, Metal Gear Solid 4 is basically fan service the video game. No, not that type of fan service, unless you're into buff old dudes with their shirts off. No, the game just happens to have some of the most iconic, fan-pleasing moments in the entire franchise. The return of iconic characters, the battles between Metal Gear Rex and Ray, Snake vs. Liquid Ocelot, Vamp vs. Raiden, the Microwave Hall. All of those moments and more are mixed into a game that features some of the franchise's best gameplay, music, performances, and graphics. Seriously, what kind of voodoo magic did Kojima pull off that made an almost 20-year-old game look as high fidelity as the games released today? If you can tolerate things like the overlong cutscenes and exposition, while also having to play the first 3 games in order to understand most of it, and having to shell out hundreds of dollars for a functioning PlayStation 3 and a copy of the game, then you will experience one of the most unique, uncompromising works of art that the medium has to offer, for better and for worse. Number 5. Soul Sacrifice, PlayStation Vita. Out of all the games on this list, Soul Sacrifice arguably had the biggest number of factors working against it. First of all, it released exclusively for the PlayStation Vita, which, though a solid piece of hardware, simply could not compete with the juggernaut that was the Nintendo 3DS. Second, it was a monster hunting game competing against another juggernaut in the same genre, that of course being the aptly named Monster Hunter. And because that series was being released on the 3DS alongside major consoles at the time, Soul Sacrifice simply had no chance. Despite its age and its handheld exclusivity, however, the game still holds up wonderfully. It has amazing art direction, some of the best I've actually ever seen in a game. It has fantastic music from the legendary Yasunori Mitsuda, who did the music for the Chrono series and Xenogears. But most importantly, it has a surprisingly in-depth and addictive game loop. Granted, the gameplay is limited to the arenas where you fight the bosses, which might come off as repetitive to those who like these types of games for their exploration and open worlds. But for those who prefer a more pick-up-and-play approach to their games, Soul Sacrifice is perfection. Unfortunately, even if you chose to buy a Vita in 2025 just for this game, you probably wouldn't be getting the full experience. Not only is there no more multiplayer, but much of the game's DLC has been taken off the official store, including tons of DLC bosses and collaborations with other games like Tukiden and God Eater. While there are methods around this for both PS Vita and emulation, it is ultimately too much work for anybody other than the most die-hard fans. Honestly, I would rather try and fail to get Monster Hunter Wilds to work properly on my PC than go through all that. Number 4. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, GameCube. I've been saying for years that Eternal Darkness is not only the most underappreciated horror game ever made, but maybe the most underappreciated game ever, period. I played this game for the first time 3 years ago, and aside from obviously the dated graphics, literally nothing else was wrong with it. It feels immensely fresh and original over 2 decades later. It has unique, satisfying combat that makes you feel powerful, without ever taking away from the feelings of vulnerability that are typical of all-time survival horror staples like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. It has a captivating story, one that spans centuries, involving a variety of protagonists trying and failing to contend with eldritch cosmic forces. And you know, it also helps that almost all of these characters are voiced by the same people from the Metal Gear Solid series, which totally doesn't bias my opinion in any way. But of course, its greatest and most famous element is its sanity system. A registered trademark of Nintendo Corporation, all rights reserved. Do not reproduce if you ever wish to have children one day. In short, the sanity system is like the Psycho Mantis boss fight from the aforementioned Metal Gear Solid, but for the whole game. The more you confront eldritch Lovecraftian monsters, the lower your sanity meter goes and the more the game starts to mess with you. Whether it's body parts falling off or getting the blue screen of death, Eternal Darkness does everything it can to break the player's grip on reality. And while some of the sanity effects don't stand the test of time due to outdated technology, the majority are still effective. But alas, like with so many underrated and undersold horror titles, original copies of the game are pretty expensive, and you can only play it on the GameCube. Please, Nintendo, please do not let this masterpiece be lost to the digital annals of time and put it on the Switch 2 store. Oh, and yeah, while you're at it, number 3, Mother 3, Game Boy Advance. There are few fan bases that have suffered more mistreatment than non-Japanese fans of the Mother franchise. For almost 2 decades, the only way you could play Mother 2, aka Earthbound as we call it in the West, is if you had the original cartridge and SNES system. Thankfully, its re-release on the Wii U and subsequently the Switch allowed a new generation of fans to enjoy this masterpiece of idiosyncrasy. Now one would think with Mother's fervent cult following, plus the immense popularity of games that were inspired by Earthbound, namely Undertale and Omori, that the third entry in the franchise would get an English localization. Well, it did, but not an official one. The only way to play Mother 3 in English is if you emulate it and download a fan patch, or if you buy a Game Boy Advance cartridge with the English translation modded onto it. Otherwise, you're screwed. And unfortunately, given that the period of time between Mother 3's release and now is longer than the period of time between Mother 2 and its release on the Wii U, I think the chances of it ever being officially released in the West are nil. And it's too bad, because the game is legitimately great. It takes all of the stuff from the original game and expands upon it in strictly positive ways, particularly in respect to characterization, as well as its trademark balance of whimsy and dark seriousness. Some fans have theorized that the way Mother 3 handles some of its dark themes, particularly regarding bereavement, that Nintendo thought it might not be received well in the West. Well, if Omori can sell over 1 million copies, and that's one of the darkest games I've ever played, then surely, a game like Mother 3 can make its money back and then some with an English translation. It would theoretically be the easiest win in gaming history, next to putting Bloodborne on PC with a 60 frames per second patch. But you know, I guess that neither Sony nor Nintendo like money! Number 2. Panzer Dragoon Saga, Sega Saturn. In the mid-1990s, a little game called Final Fantasy VII was released, and with it, a worldwide boom of JRPGs burst forward. This was a problem for Sega and their console, the Saturn, at the time, because the majority of these JRPGs were being released exclusively on the PlayStation 1. Looking to remain competitive, Sega gave the developers behind Panzer Dragoon Saga, a JRPG that would remain exclusive to the Saturn, all the money and resources they needed to ensure the game was as good, if not better, than Final Fantasy VII. Though this was a tall order to say the least, the game was considered by many at the time to be at least as good as Final Fantasy VII. And to this day, it is still generally considered the best game ever released on the Saturn. It was a technical marvel for the time, including things that even FF7 in all its greatness did not have. It had fully 3D worlds, without any pre-rendered backgrounds, fully voice-acted cutscenes, one of the best soundtracks for a video game ever, and some of the most creative outside-the-box gameplay design, combining systems that sound contradictory, like rail shooting and turn-based combat, into perfect harmony. Unfortunately, because the Saturn only sold around 9 million units worldwide, plus the fact that Panzer Dragoon Saga's constant delays had it release after the JRPG boom, its fate as a financial flop was sealed. Less than 30,000 English-language copies were ever produced, and trying to get your hands on one so you can play the game legally is just not worth it. You would get better value investing in a decent gaming PC than in trying to purchase one of the copies of this game plus a Saturn to play it on. This is probably one of the biggest tragedies in the history of gaming. Not just because the game is so inaccessible, but because the people who made it worked themselves to death, and in a couple of cases, I mean that literally. As great as this game is, it will probably be mostly remembered as a cruel reminder that video games, while an art form, are just as much a business. Number 1. Terranigma, SNES. Yeah, several of you knew that when I put Illusion of Gaia in the honorable mentions, but not Terranigma, that it would be either at number 1 or 2 on this list. But aside from the few of us who know about Quintet and their games, most people watching this video have never even heard of either them or Terranigma. The reason why is because 2/3 of my viewers are from North America, and Terranigma was never released on this continent. Therefore, the only legal way to play this game is if you import both a copy of the game and a Super Nintendo from Europe, or if you crack open your 30-year-old North American system and change the region settings, and that's after spending hundreds of dollars. This is absolutely atrocious, because Terranigma is still one of the most finely crafted video games ever made, even 30 years after its release. And it's not for any typical reason one might suspect. Though it represents all the disciplines that go into making a game at its apex, despite the limited hardware, what distinguishes Terranigma is its themes and presentation. The best way I can explain what I mean is by directly quoting a fellow YouTuber, Mike from Resonant Arc. Quote, "While RPGs like Xenogears are centered on cerebral, academic ideas that lend themselves to secular discourse, Terranigma communicates its themes through a feeling, through abstraction that speaks to the emotions rather than to the intellect. In other words, if Xenogears is king of intellectual storytelling, Terranigma is on the same level but in terms of intuition. The game is one long meditation on the miracle of life, the scientific and metaphysical forces that brought it about, how civilization and the moral systems that underpin it were birthed, and the important part that each of us play in it. It is a massive, progressive achievement for a game that is both so old and so deceptively simple on the surface. And yet, the vast majority of us will likely never be able to play it legally." And that was my list of the top 10 greatest games you can't play. Do you agree with my picks? Are there games that I neglected to mention? Let me know in the comments section below. Before you take off, remember to hit the like button if you like this video, and if you like the work I do here, please consider supporting me on Patreon or joining my YouTube membership section, where I offer various perks and rewards for your support. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.